3. You're live.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Free Assange Vigil 60.2. I am joined today with
61.1.
It's 61.1.
Oh, sorry.
We're in week 61 already.
Holy crap, you guys.
61 straight weeks.
So wait, do I have the wrong numbers up? We're so professional, y'all.
I don't know. It's just the title. The title didn't get updated, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, see, it's not my fault then. I don't feel so bad.
We're so scripted.
It's Andrew's fault.
Sorry, we're doing it live, bitches.
Do it live.
All right, so we're going to pretend that didn't happen, and we'll start over with that. Okay? Ready? Here we go. Should we do the, what is it? Is it the Wayne's World thing? The rewind or whatever? Whatever. Anyway. All right, yeah. So here we go. So wait, what is it again?
61.1.
Oh, hey, it just updated. You guys are fucking with me. Okay. All right, so here we go.
It's happy.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 61.1 of the Free Assange Vigil. I am joined today, as always, by my host, Steve Poikinen and Andrew Smith. We also have an amazing guest tonight, Patrick Anderson. He has a really cool project he's been working on that he's going to tell us about. But before we get into that, let's go over the numbers for the week. We have 355 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange. 509 days since the WikiLeaks founder was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the United Kingdom for a $4.2 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund loan to Ecuador. Julian has been held without rearrest since new superseding indictment issued by Bill Barr's Department of Justice, which was June 24, 2020, which is 70 days. We have 6 days left until the second phase of the extraordinary rendition hearings. So it's, time's up. Here we go. We have 1,187 days of incarceration in federal custody for Reality Winner. And our little tiny ray of hope and bright light, as always, is the 168 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning. And just to remind everybody, Chelsea has been going live on Twitch Thursday through Sunday. I think it's from 7 to 11 p.m. Eastern. So if you guys want to, pop in there and just, show her some love, she could definitely use it, I guess, So yeah, is that all? Oh, Andrew, did you want to talk about the GoFundMe and the action for the week?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. So we are going to DC. We will be there for the full 3 weeks, as everybody knows, hopefully already. You can find that full event schedule on our website, and I'll drop it in chat for everyone as well. But we do have the GoFundMe still running, and it'll be going through about the middle of the third week, maybe towards the end. The money takes about 2 or 3 days to actually arrive, so we'll be able to use it for food, for additional printing material, and things like that while I'm actually in DC. But there are some other GoFundMes up as well for Julian's legal team, and you can also always donate to the Courage Foundation too, or to WikiLeaks directly through their website. But I do want to talk about this week's call to action, because I did put one out earlier, and it's 2 parts. The second part I'll talk about first. That is simply a call to action that was put out by the Courage Foundation, and I'm going to just drop that link in there. And this is just the same thing we've been talking about here for a while, which is the idea of decentralized activism, which is being that one person in your community that stands up to make some noise about Julian's case. And the other part of the action is reaching out to your local Congress critters. I have 3 different tools in there that we use quite regularly: ResistBot, Contacting Congress, as well as National Priorities list of representatives that they have. So I just want everyone to take a moment here as we get closer to Julian's trial to understand how lazy our Congress actually is here in the U.S. They will be going on recess, which is basically them getting to take a month off, on the 7th and coming back the Monday after Julian's trial ends. His hearing ends over in the UK. So they conveniently aren't going to be in their offices for the entire time that the most important event in free speech has happened in the last century. So if you could go on there and reach out to your local Congress critters and ask them to ask them for a meeting, most importantly, see if you can get them to sit down with you. But beyond that, just send them information educating them about Julian and his situation, because we had a recent vote where almost half, just under, maybe about a third, struck down a military budget, or said no to, not struck down, it's still passed. But so there are still some people in Congress that may be able to stand up, especially in this moment, if they really understand what's going on. But with that, I will pass it over to Steve. How are you today, Steve?
Oh, living the dream of a wildfire evacuee. But before I introduce tonight's guest, let me tell you guys a story real quick though, man, because this is kind of nuts. So the place that we're at, that we got like temporary lodging at until we can go back to our house, which may still be a couple of weeks now. Where's that feedback coming from? At any rate,
I think it's Patrick. Mute for a second, Patrick.
Hey, there we go. At any rate, the place that we're at for a couple of weeks until everybody can go home is very concerned about the coronavirus. Very, very, very concerned about the coronavirus. Talked about this a little bit when Ryan from The Last American Vagabond was on my show on Sunday, where a guy actually jumped back about 4 feet so he wouldn't have to touch a packet of like Splenda that I had come into contact with, even though he was wearing 2 pairs of gloves and a mask and a face shield. This morning at breakfast, there was a dude who yelled at my 8-year-old, "You need to get 6 feet back now!" And he is also wearing 2 pairs of gloves and a face mask and a shield. And it's like, if you're that scared, you shouldn't be here. You know, like this may be a volunteer gig for you. And if that's the kind of fear that you live in, to the point to where you have to scream at an 8-year-old child who's trying to take the leftover cold yet somehow overcooked jail food that they give us here, you need to go somewhere else. So with that rant being over, I would like to introduce tonight's guest. He's been on my show before. He is a philosophy professor. He writes out of the Black Agenda Report and Mint Press News, and just put together the I believe first bibliography online for WikiLeaks. So please welcome to the show, Patrick Anderson. Patrick, how are you, man? Good to see you. Oh, you're still muted.
All right, there we go. Pretty good, man. Thanks for having me back.
For sure. So the last time that you and I talked, you were in the process of building this website. And if you could go into what that is and how people can interact with it and where they can find it, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
It's if you type into the URL bar, https://wikileaksbibliography.org. It'll take you right to the website, and you can access all the pages. You can access all the pages from there. I wanted to build this because, over the last 4 or 5 years or so, I got really interested in WikiLeaks, and especially around the 2016 election, I thought people didn't really understand what Assange was up to and what WikiLeaks is all about, and it became this like really partisan thing that was read only through the lens of like the Democratic Party and the sort of Hillary Clinton followers, and so I was like, okay, well, maybe this needs to be studied from a scholarly perspective. And as I talked to other academics, they had the same they were getting their ideas about WikiLeaks from the same place everyone else does, U.S. corporate media. And when I read the actual scholarly articles about WikiLeaks, all those same ideas showed up in the scholarly articles. So it was almost like it was in fancier language, most of the time. But at the end of the day, it was like what Bill Keller believed about Assange and WikiLeaks. And academics were just sort of like putting that into their research papers, and then that was becoming sort of embedded as knowledge. Just to give a really egregious example, of which I found even more today when I was doing some research for this paper I'm working on. One of the things that is like just repeated ad infinitum is this idea that WikiLeaks just, you know, when they were publishing on Iraq and Afghanistan, just dropped, you know, 800,000 documents on the internet. And it's like, you know, it's well known that that's not how it played out, that it was a little more back and forth about this. WikiLeaks didn't want to have any redactions, and in the Afghanistan publications, that got them into a lot of trouble, got them a lot of criticism. So with the Iraq publications, they did a bunch of redactions, and then with the Cablegate publications, they actually only originally published a few thousand of the documents until the Guardian journalist, you know, published the password to the trove in his book and sort of let it out. And even then, in Laura Poitras's documentary Risk, there's an entire scene where Julian Assange is trying to call the State Department and speak with Hillary Clinton and let her know that, hey, this password is going to come out and there's nothing we can do to stop these documents from, so you're going to want to go through your stuff and look for, so he was even trying to warn them, right? But like in paper after paper after paper, academics just make this assertion with no citations. Oh, well, WikiLeaks just mass dumps, you know, dumps documents, you know, and these large troves on the internet. And so, you know, and that's immoral because they should be redacting these things and protecting people's, you know, individual names and so on. And I was just like, how can this circulate as just a de facto thing, as just something everyone assumes and no one checks? And I was like, there's got to be some kind of centralized place where people can go to learn and study about WikiLeaks. And so in building the bibliography, the first component of it that I wanted to have was primary sources. Just read what Sarah Harrison and Julian Assange have written and said. It's not that freaking hard, right? There's essays out there, there's books out there, there's interviews and videos out there. Just read those and listen to those and learn from the people who actually like run the freaking website. Like, that's not so hard. But, you know, that's not usually the way that it's done in academia when it comes to studying WikiLeaks. So that's one thing I wanted to have on there, is just some primary sources. The other thing I wanted to have on there is sections where people could look at what academic stuff has been published, you know, just a list of those articles so they could find them if they wanted. And one section is about WikiLeaks in the news, and this is part that's still under construction, but I want to go through and catalog, for example, all the New York Times reporting on Assange and WikiLeaks over the years so that you can kind of get a big picture view of what's going on there, rather than this like piecemeal, one article at a time understanding of it. And then the last section of it is a collection of research guides. And right now I have 3 of them up on the website. There's a WikiLeaks primer reading list. So this would be for somebody who maybe doesn't know that much about WikiLeaks or has never read anything that Assange has written, for example. There's a cypherpunk reading list, and this is for people who are unaware that Julian Assange identifies as a participant in the cypherpunk movement, and their sort of advocacy of the use of crypto was important to his intellectual foundations and the construction of WikiLeaks. And then the third one I have up so far is a primer on scientific journalism, which is the kind of publishing that WikiLeaks says that it does. And I plan to expand those and add new reader guides in the future too. But that's kind of the basic idea, is just like a centralized place where people could go learn about WikiLeaks. And if they had questions, my email's right on the website, so they can email me and ask me something. It doesn't mean I have all the answers, but you know, at least I can do what I can to help.
That is that's impressive and fantastic, and it's totally worth noting that when WikiLeaks was publishing the Iraq war logs, it was the Guardian and the New York Times that wanted to jump out ahead with unredacted material, and Julian himself stayed up for like 2 straight days making around 10,000 redactions just so he could kind of cut that off before it happened. And it was, we know from Mark Davies in his talk at Politics on the Pub last year, that the Guardian and the New York Times and Der Spiegel were completely willing and ready to let Julian hang while they still wanted to take credit for getting to this scoop and being the first people in their respective countries to get it out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, Bill Keller is a smug and spineless person. I mean, like, you know, I've read his essays, I've read what he's written about Julian, I've, you know, seen interviews with him, and like, you know, the very fact that he becomes the executive editor of the New York Times, and the New York Times is, you know, sort of this self-identified, you know, paper of record, so to speak. I mean, just the fact that Bill Keller ascends to like the pinnacle of American journalism, and then you see what kind of character he has, and you know, just his disposition. It really just says a lot about the industry as a whole. You know, that like, it's just like politics, right? Like, oh, how does Trump or how does Obama like reach the top of politics? You know, it just says a lot about their character, given the kind of system that we have. And so, you know, the same thing, you know, is true of, and their character says a lot about the system we have. And the same thing is true of Bill Keller. You know, just the fact that he can get into such a position of power and influence within journalism, you know, shows that there is a real issue with that profession and with the sort of news media industry, as it were.
Well, a big part of the problem, not to downplay like Operation Mockingbird and CIA plans and all of those fun things that are throughout the media, is the academic institutions which create journalists in and of themselves. Because Taylor Hudak, one of our co-hosts, recently graduated from one, going for journalism, and basically like wasted a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of time when she could have just started doing journalism instead of going to school for it. But in a lot of academic institutions, there's pushback, even when you try to cover WikiLeaks in like the papers that you write and the reports that you put out and the theses that you develop. And then if you're a journalist major that tries to cover WikiLeaks, it just gets shut down even more so beyond that. So that then feeding into the clickbait nature of mainstream media nowadays just creates this hyper partisan duality, where MSNBC will still call him the WikiLeaks guy and say that there was all this Russia bullshit going on, and at very most say like, yeah, maybe that shouldn't be happening, but even then it's followed with insult after insult.
No, it's true. I mean, I submitted a paper for an academic journal. It went through peer review, and when I got the comments back, one of the reviewers was great. It was like, look, here's how you can improve the argument. Here's, you know, what we'd like to see to get it published. Super helpful, right? Exactly what it should be. I don't even know if they like WikiLeaks or dislike WikiLeaks or Assange or whatever. Like, it was about the argument. The other reviewer, on the other hand, clearly, like, was just triggered by the fact that I would even write something in any kind of positive manner about Assange. And the comments I got back on the paper had nothing to do with what I wrote. In fact, I don't think they even said anything about what was in the paper. The only thing that they responded to was the fact that I had suggested that Julian Assange is a journalist, and then all the rest, and they of course, like, you know, gave some BS argument about why that wasn't the case. But then after that, the whole thing was about how, well, you know, they don't tell us who their sources are, and so how do we know that they're not being used as a front by foreign government? I was like, you're telling me that in an academic paper, the best you can do is Russiagate me? Like, that's all you have? Like, so in my response, when I sent it back to the editor, I said, look, this is obviously just a partisan and nationalist response to the paper. It has nothing to do with the argument I was making. I don't know that there's any revisions I can make that will please this reviewer. And, you know, and I didn't get that same reviewer the next time around. So, you know, but like, it's just very interesting. I also have, you know, other academics who suggest to me, they're like, well, do you think that Julian Assange has Trump's tax returns and just decided not to publish them? And I was like, well, what kind of speculation is that? That doesn't make any sense. And they're like, well, you know, maybe he got them and just held them back because he was trying to hurt Clinton and help Trump. And I was like, what day of the week would WikiLeaks not publish a bombshell, you know, disclosure like that? We have Trump's tax returns. That would be massive. You know, there's no way they would hold those back. But it's just because Assange and WikiLeaks can only be interpreted by U.S. liberals through this very narrow partisan and nationalist lens. And, you know, it's really hard to understand, you know, a non-nation state, you know, networked 21st century, like sort of digitally native organization like WikiLeaks if all you have is these partisan and national lenses to read it through.
And the people that make that argument completely ignore the fact that, you know, all you have to do is go on WikiLeaks. They have a handy little search bar, and you can look, and, you know, they've published damaging information about, I mean, just about everybody, you know, like multiple countries, you know, Republicans, Democrats, everybody. I mean, they've published damaging stuff against Russia. So it's this complete, you know, land of make-believe where, you know, they've convinced themselves that this narrative is reality. And it doesn't matter that it doesn't make any sense at all, and that it's been debunked over and over. I mean, bombshell, the walls are closing in, you know, all of that stuff. And it just gets walked back every time. And they're still doing it. It's amazing. And like Steve said, says all the time, the United States is the most propagandized country on planet Earth. And I think that this is just a prime example of that, because the fact that this, you know, crazy theory is continuing into 2020 and beyond is, I mean, proof positive that people do not have critical thinking skills anymore. You know, it's kind of crazy.
Last week, my wife was telling her aunt that, you know, I was going to DC and why I was going to DC. And as soon as she said Julian's name, her aunt goes, "What, is he a Trump supporter?" Like they're related. Like, because that's just what she lives in an affluent neighborhood right outside of Santa Cruz, and is like the I don't know, picture perfect NPR liberal, and cannot in her mind decouple what she heard on the TV about Julian Assange with, you know, reality in any way, shape, or form. I'm sorry I dropped out there for a minute. My fucking phone decided that I didn't have a SIM card all of a sudden. And I got this message on my phone saying that it didn't have a SIM card. And I'm out here, like, basically in sand dunes off of a mobile hotspot doing the show, which I have successfully done last Sunday, the Saturday. You know, I've made this work before. But this is really freaking weird.
Yeah, I mean, 6 days away from Julian's trial is not a surprise that there's some anomalous technical issues. But so I did want to talk too about the documentaries that have been coming out about Julian, because Juan Passarelli released one recently that aired over the weekend that we were fortunate enough to be able to play here on the Vigil. And there was another one that just recently came out as well, focusing on what's been happening to Julian. And I was just wondering if you'd had a chance to see any of those that have been coming out, or if you had a chance to like view any of the teach-ins or any of the other like documentaries that you'd put up on your playlist. Yeah,
the most recent one that I'm aware of is the Not in Our Name, the psychological torture of Assange one. That's the most recent one that I'm familiar with and that I've seen, which you know, kind of follows up from the reports that have been coming out about the last 2 years about his failing health and the fact that the UN has, you know, basically declared that he's, you know, he has the symptoms of someone who's been tortured. You know, he has those kinds of conditions. So that's the one that I'm that's the newest one that I'm familiar with.
There was over the weekend, Juan Passarelli released a documentary. I can't remember the title of it. I'm trying to pull it up here real quick. But the one that just came out was released by DW Documentary. It's called WikiLeaks, Public Enemy Julian Assange. This came out back in February, and it's gotten close to 1 million views out on YouTube now. And I just always think things like this are really awesome to try to share around. So I was just gonna make sure I got this one over to you.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have that one up on the site yet, so I'll have to add it. But yeah, I spent a good chunk of last summer and this summer trying to go through and dig up decent documentaries about WikiLeaks. There's a really good older one from 2010 called Wiki Rebels, and it's a Swedish documentary, and that one is pretty good in terms of documenting, you know, the time where the Afghanistan and Iraq war logs were being published. There's another one, Sex, Lies, and Julian Assange, and that one is about the sexual assault allegations in Sweden, and it does a pretty decent job of like giving a straight up timeline of like, here's when events happened, here's, you know, when this came out, here's when the police reports were leaked to the tabloids and everything like that. And I found that one to be, you know, sort of just incredibly helpful for unpacking what exactly, you know, is going on there, you know, as the events unfolded and what the actual accusations are. Because, you know, like I said, if you just read the New York Times or something like that, they'll just say, oh, he's been accused of sexual assault, and then they move on, and then, but you never really see like under what conditions is this happening, and, you know, who might be actually using the victims instrumentally for their own purposes, you know, law enforcement agencies, you know, across Europe and the United States. So, so I mean that, you know, there's, you know, there's some pretty good older documentaries as well, and I think, you know, those are two that I found to be super informative even.
Absolutely. I'm actually trying to get those pulled up on your website to put the link in the chat for everybody.
Yeah,
I do want to, real quick, I want to circle back to an earlier part of the conversation where we were kind of kicking around academia a little bit, because I don't think it gets its share of criticism, especially in terms of U.S. propaganda and how people are sort of put into these groupthink situations with material that's ostensibly supposed to inform and instruct and educate them, that is nothing but bullshit and smears. And there's a reason when Ray McGovern talks about the Mickey Mat, that the A in Mickey Mat stands for academia. Mm-hmm. Real quick, because I love that acronym, it's the Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Academia Think Tank Complex. And it is so just all inclusive, and it's really hard to take one aspect of the Mickey Mat without seeing the influence of the rest of them in it. And that's what we're not just fighting the military industrial complex. We're not just fighting an establishment or legacy or corporate media. We're up against all of these institutions that are thought to be, you know, pillars of both intelligence and I fucking respect. And it is the complete opposite of that in most cases. I realize that you're a professor. I'm not specifically talking about you, Patrick, but as Andrew mentioned, I mean, Taylor was going up to her master's review board, and they're like, you can't talk about this. You can't include this in your thesis. You can't have, you know, and it's so fucking shameful that an institution of higher learning would be like, you can't use that source because it's too true for your journalism degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the introduction to the WikiLeaks files, you know, Assange writes about the kind of moratorium that certain sectors of academia have put on using WikiLeaks documents as the basis for their, you know, for their academic publications. And like, you know, being inside academia and having been, you know, I mean, if we count from undergrad days through grad school and now as faculty, you know, I've been in academia for 13, 14 years at this point. And, you know, you would think that it's like the place where you can go and there actually is just like pure free discussion. But they're humans, they're socialized into an institutional and professional culture the same as everyone is. And there's, you know, values and norms and assumptions that come along with being socialized into those circles. And so that means that some things, you know, like things about WikiLeaks in particular, they can just be stated and restated with no footnotes, no citations, because it's just seen as true. It's common sense, it's matter of fact, and so you don't need citations for those. And so, you know, like when I try to broach these kinds of conversations, you know, the first thing people do nowadays, at least, is think that I'm like some Trump supporter dude. And I was like, you know, like I wrote my dissertation on the Black radical tradition. I don't know what business I would have like Trump in any kind of, you know, in any kind of fashion. It's not like the Black Panthers politics leads you to be like, yeah, Trump is great, make America great again. So like, you know, so like there's just, you know, they're like there's no way for them to reconcile all that in many cases. But yeah, I mean, I went to grad school at Texas A&M University. It's an old school military college. And when you think about the structure of it, you know, like even just like here, like, so you have the you have the George H.W. Bush School of Political Science, and they have everybody coming through there from, you know, regional FBI offices all the way to Mike Pompeo coming in to give speeches at Texas A&M. It's very connected to the State Department and the Justice Department in that way. Then you've got the College of Engineering, which is gets tons and tons of money from military contractors, Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. And then you've got like the actual military part of the school, the ROTC program that has its different factions, you know, Army, Air Force, and so on. So when you look just at Texas A&M, like there's the military industrial complex right there, and it's all embedded in academia, just like Ray McGovern says. So you've got your diplomats and your federal law enforcement being trained in the Bush School. Then you've got your engineers being trained in the College of Engineering who are going to go work for the defense contractors that make the weapons. And then you've got the people being groomed to be officers and go into the military and into the Pentagon. And then like that's the network, right? And it's like, and it's all in one place. It's all in this one training, you know, all of this one training ground where you can produce all these people to fill all of these institutions. So yeah, academia is definitely intimately linked with all of those systems. And then of course, when we add, like we were talking about earlier, journalism schools and how journalism schools, you know, create journalistic professionals that go and then populate corporate media, you know, like that's how these systems socialize people and prepare them to take all, you know, to fill these institutions, so that like there can be some kind of continuity. But in order to have that continuity, you have to be able to instill in them like the values and assumptions, so that the, you know, certain things like American exceptionalism or you know, or any kind of partisan views become second nature to them. You know, they just become obvious truths that we can all assume. And so yeah, I mean, academia is intimately connected with that in more ways than just that. But, you know, Texas A&M was illuminating to me, you know, as a grad student.
Oh, I bet. I only know one other Aggie personally, and that's Lyle Lovett. I think he
for real.
Yeah. Oh, and Robert Earl Keen too. Both of those guys went to A&M. About 10 years ago, I got to know Lyle Lovett like fairly well there for a while. But I mean, he would talk about College Station like he was just a complete fucking fish out of water. And he was like, I only went there because that's where I had the grades to go. And my parents told me I had to go to college, so I went to A&M. God damn it. I had a question before I started talking about that too. Misty or Andrew, you should jump in. Well,
Yeah,
Well, I wanted
what the fuck I was gonna say.
that's okay. I wanted to ask Patrick kind of how you came. I like to ask everybody this, like, how did you come to the Assange cause? Like, what was it? I think everybody's kind of got their story about when they first heard about WikiLeaks and when they first saw the collateral murder video, and kind of, I always like to see, you know, what brought you to it and why it's important to you, if that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, the first time I heard about WikiLeaks was during the Iceland stuff in 2010. I was really fascinated by people in Iceland just taking to the streets. And I was like, well, that never really happens in the US. And, you know, when it does, it's just for some, like, you know, nationalistic purpose, you know, probably to, you know, further imperialism or something like that. And so I was really interested in that. But it was kind of touch and go for me for WikiLeaks. I was actually in Ghana. I was in West Africa at the time of the Cablegate stuff. And so, you know, I was getting a little bit of the news from it there, but I wasn't saturated in the U.S. media, you know, like people who would have been back at home. And it was really when I started, well, I guess two things really sort of like hooked me in. One was WikiLeaks publishing stuff during the 2016 election, where I really started paying attention to it. And then the other thing was my office mate in grad school, you know, had been following WikiLeaks for some time, and he taught stuff about Assange and WikiLeaks in his introductory ethics class. And it's largely because of him that I know anything about technology in the first place. He taught me well, and I owe him for that. And so but the funny thing is that, like, once he kind of got me, you know, interested in WikiLeaks and had me read one or two of Assange's short essays, I said, you know, this is something I really have to get to know. So I just picked up all the books that Assange has out and read them all, and started collecting his essays and reading them, and started citing them in my classes. And then I started reading secondary books on it, and I looked into the history of the cypherpunk movement and learned about the history of crypto and all this kind of stuff. And so it was really like the 2015, 2016 time, and between, you know, WikiLeaks publishing the DNC and Podesta emails, and you know, and being around my office mate in grad school, who was pretty knowledgeable about it at the time, and you know, was out and was able to sort of, you know, get me started, get the wheels going there.
So the cypherpunk movement in particular, I think, is something that's extremely interesting. If you could you highlight that a little bit more? Because I feel like you would be more well suited to talk about that than me.
Yeah, the cypherpunk stuff is fascinating. In fact, I was talking to a publisher this morning about doing a short book on cypherpunk movement. So, you know, if it turns out and it, you know, goes well, then, you know, that might be finished and done and published by sometime next summer. Although it's, you know, it's in the seed stages right now. So, but hopefully it'll turn out. Yeah, the cypherpunk movement emerged in the early 1990s. And their entire sort of motivation was the fact that the U.S. government was trying to have a monopoly on the use of digital encryption. And in his book Crypto, the journalist Steve Levy actually gives a pretty good history of the development of crypto and of public key encryption, which is what basically makes everything that's encrypted on the internet possible. So whenever you send an iMessage from one iPhone to the other, it's end-to-end encrypted. Whenever you log into your bank through your app on your phone, it's end-to-end encrypted. If you use Signal, anytime you go to a website that has HTTPS on it, that's encrypted. And there's a lot of different encryption protocols, but the idea is that all of those things save, you know, sort of protect your information while it's in transit, so that snoopers can't see it. So if you buy something on Amazon with a credit card, well, that interaction, that transaction is encrypted, so that way people can't just pick your credit card number, you know, out of, you know, as it's being sent across the fiber optic cables, and then use it themselves. So the US government wanted to actually say only the NSA can produce crypto. And in 1991, when he was a senator and the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Joe Biden introduced legislation that would make it illegal for anybody to have encrypted software or encrypted, disks that there was no accessible keys for law enforcement. And when this news came out, a guy by the name of Phil Zimmerman, who created PGP, or Pretty Good Privacy, it's an encryption system that he wrote, over like the entire decade of the 80s by himself in his house. He almost went bankrupt doing it. He, posted it for free, or he had a friend post it for free on the internet, the new internet, and it was distributed globally within a matter of hours. And after that, there was no putting crypto back in the bag. And so for the whole entire 90s, the cypherpunk movement, which organized around that time in 91, 92, they were trying to make sure that crypto would be publicly available. And by the end of the 90s, they had won all the court battles they needed to, and all the public relations battles they needed to make crypto available. And the main idea, or the main principle or slogan or whatever that comes out of the cypherpunk movement is privacy for the weak, transparency for the powerful. Privacy for the weak, transparency for the powerful. That's the basic cypherpunk idea. And the idea here is that digital crypto allows individuals to encrypt their internet transactions, their economic transactions, and their communications, so that they can't be spied upon by things like the NSA. But transparency for the powerful, the other half of that principle, says that crypto can also be used to make sure that powerful organizations and institutions like corporations and governments, political parties, national security, state agencies, all of these kinds of things can actually have their power challenged through leaks. And this is sort of where WikiLeaks fits into the overall cypherpunk idea. The idea that you can create an encrypted system and elicit leaks from these organizations, such that the organizations don't necessarily know where they're coming from. And so they kind of panic and turn inward, and they have to snuff out the leak somehow. And, that makes it harder for them to carry out their nefarious designs. And so WikiLeaks actually really is embedded in this history of the cypherpunks, and through its use of encryption, but also through the fact that it's trying to uphold the second half of that slogan or principle, transparency for the powerful. And so, there's other cypherpunk-inspired crypto tools like Bitcoin, for example, right? Cryptocurrencies are a kind of mainstay in cypherpunk circles. And it's because they're a kind of currency that, governments don't have control over, and currencies that governments don't depend on, yet all the security and the independence is built into the hashing technology that makes those, the blockchains, that build the currency up. So yeah, so that's kind of the basic, history and main idea of the cypherpunk movement, as I understand it.
I usually try to make the point that in the credo, privacy for the weak, transparency for the powerful, what weak means is that you don't have political agency, you don't have financial security or freedom. Maybe you are not part of the predator class, as it were, because I usually get people that kind of you calling me weak, motherfucker, and it's like, no, dude, just look at it this way. I think go ahead.
I think one of the biggest struggles is the way that people view themselves relative to intelligence communities and view their privacy relative to intelligence communities, because you have people literally anywhere. If you go up and start talking about oh, the NSA is collecting your data, you still get the George Bush era, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so what do I need to hide kind of idea. And so I try to poke holes in that for people to really drive home what privacy means and what their digital information means, to where most people will allow their mother-in-law or friend or relative to watch their kids, but almost no one's going to let them watch their phone for the weekend. And
No.
so why would people allow that to happen where the government can come in, and you're not going to let the government watch your kids, so why are you going to let them watch your phone? And it's trying to reframe that conversation to shift public opinion at this point, that it's not about whether you're doing something right or wrong. It's about whether someone wants to sell you something or whether or not someone wants to change your mind. And that's really where the struggle for privacy comes in, because they're not trying to go and take down everybody that wants Medicare for all or wants gun rights. What they're trying to do is figure out what buttons they have to push to change your mind about certain topics. And that's where these mass collection programs come in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's, kind of like 2 or 3, big ideas here in this question about privacy for the weak, transparency for the powerful, and what privacy actually means in the face of mass surveillance in the way that we have it, in the last 2 or 3 decades. The first thing is that, by juxtaposing weak and powerful, the cypherpunks actually put power at the center of the analysis, right? That's a necessary part of understanding surveillance and privacy. And if you go to, well, now I can refer to my bibliography, right? If you go to my bibliography and you go to the list of Assange essays, he's got this piece from 2014 from the New York Times where he's like, and this is in the wake of the Snowden revelations and things like that. That's the context. And he says, we've been, people have been talking a lot about privacy the last year, but we need to be clear about why we're talking about privacy. People refer to privacy as if it's inherently valuable, but it's not. The reason that we have to defend individual privacy is because every single time individual privacy is rolled back further and further, that expands the power distance between these powerful institutions and your average person. And so he says that, we defend privacy to maintain any kind of semblance of power for, your average person in the United States or around the world, right? And so Assange is very clear that it's a power analytic, it's a power dynamic that makes privacy important. Another thing about it in terms of like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, that you have nothing to fear. On the one hand, I've always liked Snowden's response to this. Saying that you don't care about surveillance because you have nothing to hide is like saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. I think that's, a very insightful way of putting it. Also, Shoshana Zuboff, who is a former Harvard business professor, and she wrote the book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She puts it like this: if you have nothing to hide, then you are nothing. If you have nothing to hide, then you are nothing. What is so special about you if there's nothing that's private and personal such that some government or corporation shouldn't or couldn't know it about you? And I think that's a really, sort of insightful way of thinking about it.
As a really gross example of that, in a way that people let their privacy go in a mass public way, during the nomination process for the guy on the Supreme Court, what was his name?
Brett Kavanaugh?
Yeah, during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. There was this weird thing that happened on social media where people started using hashtag why I didn't report. And were basically outlining their experiences for people live on the air and putting this out there in this huge dramatic way. And I don't think anyone in that moment stopped to think about what that says or could be used as a way to manipulate them through advertising and using intelligence communities to shift opinions. Mm-hmm. And so it's not even privacy on an individual like my phone privacy. It's making sure that these intelligence communities can't scrape the back end of social media platforms to just aggregate mass amounts of information to judge public perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's kind of, at the end of the day, that's what's in the background here. And so, when my, even in my students in my classes, when we talk about surveillance, they oftentimes give me, well, I don't really have anything to hide, so I never really thought about it and so on. And so I just say, okay, look, I'll pass around a piece of paper in the class, and everyone who just raised your hand, saying that you agree with the fact that if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear, just write down your login information. I want your username and password for your Facebook. Well, they probably don't have Facebook. For your Snapchat, for your Instagram, for your emails, right? I want all your passwords like that. And, if you have nothing to hide, you wouldn't mind if I spent the weekend just kind of, sipping an Arnold Palmer at home and looking through your messages and looking through your pictures, right? And I pass the piece of paper around the room, and when I get it back to the front, not a single student has written anything on it. It is as blank as when it left my hand. And I say, oh, I thought you guys had nothing to hide. And I just, it just very quickly proves the point to them that they're not as comfortable as they think they are. They like the fact that, well, I don't see the corporations or the NSA scraping my data and collecting my communications and snooping on my transactions. So if I don't see it, it's not there, right? They like to kind of just be willfully ignorant of it, or, kind of have this sort of ostrich thing going on. But when it actually comes down to it, when they're confronted with that sort of thing, they're not comfortable with it. And, you have to instill that feeling in them. You have to make them feel that way before they start realizing that, oh, maybe I do actually care about this more than I thought.
And at the same time, look at the reaction from the powerful. When you turn, if you don't have anything to hide, can we go ahead and take a look around on them? Like, they'll go out and torture a motherfucker over it. They'll go out and persecute to the ends of the earth and lock down and try to throw into a supermax for 175 years someone who turns that around on them. Oh, you don't have anything to be afraid of? You don't have anything that you want hidden? Okay, we'll show the world what you're up to.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Caitlin Stone said in her tweet that she put out. I don't remember what show I talked about it on, but the one where she says that, the closer, I'm paraphrasing here and I'm probably butchering it, but the closer you are to power, the less rights to transparency that you should have. And that's it. They don't want you to have any privacy. They want every email, every text message, every phone call, every interaction you have online. They want access to all of that, but you cannot know anything that they are doing. And if you try to expose the things that you're doing, like Steve said, they'll throw you in prison for 175 years. And I'm sorry, I have a, sorry.
Hi, Daryl.
So this actually transitions super well because we were going to talk tonight a little bit later. But if you have time, Patrick, I don't know how long you have on with us. We have Bill Binney's affidavit about the way that intelligence communities are gathering information right now. I'm not sure if you'll be around for when we get to the news segment, but I would love to go over that with you.
Yeah.
But before we do, I had a question for, well, I guess for all of us, and we can go around and kind of get everyone's opinions on it. This comes from the chat. What would be the best possible outcome of Julian's trial? What do you see as the best case scenario? And I'll start that off with you, Patrick.
Well, as one of my friends likes to do, we can break it down. What's ideal, what's good, what's okay, what's sufficient, and what's bad. I would say ideal, the court should say that we're not going to grant extradition to the United States, and Assange has served his sentence, and and so he's free to go. Like, that would be the ideal situation. What he does to pick up his life and to reorganize and get a new footing, as a free person, that's a tough question. I mean, that's something he has to work out. But yeah, I would say the ideal is just that that they deny the extradition. I think that's the best thing, the ideal thing that we can hope for. Yeah.
I'd absolutely agree with that. Just a complete dropping of the charges and letting him walk free, essentially. that would be, or at least that would be my ideal situation. A presidential pardon, I think, would fall into the good or sufficient category for the situation, but that doesn't inherently stop the process from happening again. But as long as he doesn't come here to the United States, as long as he is not sent to the prison which he exposed the torture program at, I would say anything above that is sufficient, but I don't think anything less than freedom is necessary.
Yeah.
What about you, Steve?
Why, obviously, it's in everybody but the Five Eyes' best interest that Assange is not renditioned to the U.S. and that he gets to sort of repatriate himself, whether that be in Australia or anywhere he chooses. Yeah, I mean, I ideally there would be, you know, an end to the show trial, is immediate freedom and the beginning of some sort of like reparation process. You know, everything that they've taken from this man over the last decade in terms of health, sanity, finances, a place to live, the ability to watch his children grow and spend time with them. You can't really put a price on that, but I'm sure we could come to some sort of agreement on what that might look like. I'm hesitant to like try and put out any kind of hope because of the world we live in, but on its face, there is zero legality to this entire fucking charade. Every single tenet of the rule of law has been violated. And Garland Nixon told me a couple of weeks ago that he's sick of hearing the phrase rule of law because it's not the rule of law, it's an arbitrary application of law. And that's what we witness every day in the U.S. criminal justice system. It's what we're witnessing with Julian Assange. But it is going to be really, really difficult for the prosecution to carry through an extradition hearing with witness testimony from people who destroy their case entirely just by the dint of being in that room. Daniel Ellsberg is going to testify in this. Chris Hedges is going to testify in this. You know, there's a number of people who have intimate knowledge of what happened with UC Global that are going to be a part of the defense witness list. So it's, you know, in a world that wasn't a fucking cartoon, you would be able to be like, this man has had no lawyer-client confidentiality in 3 goddamn years. You know, this is every single human, civil, international law right protection that people are guaranteed has been ripped away from this man. There's a report showing how he's been systemically, psychologically tortured for years. And that's not enough to get a case tossed. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. But I think it's going to go to appeals. I do. Whatever the UK appeals process is, I don't think the UK is interested at all in what it says in their own law books. I think they're following orders. Misty? Or Shoshana?
Sorry. Well, I mean, I'm honest. I hate answering these questions because I'm a cynic and I get a lot of shit for it. But yeah, it doesn't look great. I mean, if we're just being honest, it doesn't look great. So, I mean, if you're asking me like what my ideal situation is, obviously I would like to, honestly, just for my own selfish needs, I'd like to go Hulk smash Belmarsh and carry him out myself, just for my own personal, like, feel better session, you know? but I can't do that. So, I mean, but I don't know if there's a best case scenario here, because Steve's right. It's going to, whatever happens, it's going to go to appeal. It's going to get dragged out even longer. They're going to continue to abuse this man and break him down physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I unless we can get a whole lot of people to get a whole lot louder, I don't see that. It doesn't look great. I mean, I'm sorry. I hate being the bearer of bad news, but let's just be honest about the system and situation we find ourselves in, like, and not to mention it's 2020, y'all.
If you are in the Washington, D.C. area, September 5th through 25th, please join Action for Assange. You can find all the locations we'll be demonstrating throughout the nation's capital on our website.
Nice, dude. That was smooth as shit, Steve Poikinen. Smooth as shit. Nice. I'm impressed right there.
We need to do
that all in one breath too, and y'all see
that was amazing. I'm seriously impressed by that shit. That was great.
When are we doing the ASMR?
Okay, so
ASMR.
Did you be real? Did
I
you
listen
read
to a
that?
lot of R.A. the Rugged Man and trying to keep up with that dude when he's in the middle of a flow, like in one breath, trying to match the breath control of that. It's a chore. It's a task. It's a genuine workout. But my fucking 42-year-old fucking pack and a half a day ass can kind of get there. Kinda. I'll smoke less in DC. I won't be allowed to smoke indoors anywhere. Oh shit, that's dead air. Josh is gonna yell at us.
I just was gonna do it.
Do we want to go to the affidavit, Andrew? How much time do you have, Patrick? Can you hang out for a little bit longer? You got to go. What's the deal?
No, I can hang out.
Okay, my God, I'm like completely fucking. Now I look like a protected witness or something.
You do. What are you talking about? We need to do the voice thing. The voice thing.
Modulator.
Kevin will do that for us in a little
bit.
Right.
Kevin's been working wonders on our tech all day.
So just so you know, Patrick, Kevin is our tasked intelligence community member that fucks with us. He's like the guy behind the scenes.
We nicknamed the NSA agent tasked with monitoring and fucking with the chat Kevin. In the UK, he's Trevor. Yeah. Because if you don't laugh at it, then all you'll do is like give a possum scream all day, every day, and that's slightly less productive.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the other day when I was working on the website, I spent Saturday, I spent hours like putting in, like building pages and everything like that. And then Sunday morning I woke up and I was like, all right, let's get to this and let's, finish it up. And it wasn't working. And I was like, the first thing I thought of was like, did my website get sabotaged?
Blame Kevin.
Yep.
That's what I do.
Fucking Kevin!
He's following the
funnest. A little cathartic. It is. So are we doing the affidavit thing?
I actually wanted to do the Craig Murray thing first. I wanted to talk about where Craig Murray's at and what's going on. If you could pull up that first article, Josh. Assange travesty continues.
So Craig, this came out 2 days ago on craigmurray.org.uk, which is a website that you should already have bookmarked in the first place. The travesty is Julian Assange's extradition hearing resumes fully on 7 September at the Old Bailey. I shall be abandoning my own legal team and going down to London to cover it again in full for an expected 3 weeks. And guys, Craig Murray's coverage of the first phase of this was just absolutely incredible. How this is going to work at the Old Bailey, I do not know. COVID restrictions presumably mean that the numbers in the public gallery will be tiny. As of now, there's no arrangement for Julian's friends and family in place. It looks like 4 a.m. queuing is in prospect. By 7 September, it'll be 6 months since I applied to resume my membership of the National Union of Journalists. I still have not the slightest idea who objected or what the grounds were for objection. I have not heard from the NUJ for months. A senior official of an international journalist organization has told us that he inquired and learned from the NUJ national executive that has considered my application and set up a subcommittee to report. But if so, why is this secret? Why have I not been informed? And why am I not allowed to know what the objection is? I find this all very sinister. At this stage, it is not paranoid to wonder whose hand is behind this. The practical effect of this is that without NUJ membership, I cannot access a press card and avail myself of whatever media arrangements are in place for the Assange hearing, just as I was kept out of most of the Salmon trial. I have now reached the stage where I would like to take legal action against the NUJ, but the finances are beyond me. I'm not going to ask you to donate because we are going to need all our resources for the contempt case against me, which the Crown dragged out. I shall be writing next week about my own case and that hearing earlier this week. I would just note now that the virtual hearing is entirely unsatisfactory and unfair on defendants. There was at least one occasion when my QC agreed with a suggestion of the judge when I would have instructed them not to, had I been, as I should normally have been, seated near them in court and able to instruct. Unlike our adversaries, including the Integrity Initiative, the 77th Brigade, Bellingcat, the Atlantic Council, and hundreds of other warmongering propaganda operations, this blog has no source of state. So, guys, if you haven't already, throw a few coins Craig Murray's way. He needs our help. We needs the exact same energy that we're putting into Julian Assange's case behind his. It is mentioned in the indictment against Craig Murray that him writing about the first part of Julian's hearing has been incorporated into this contempt charge.
And so I would honestly like to know if they're using that contempt charge and thus the fact that they're saying specifically his reporting on WikiLeaks is what makes him such a profound journalist, if that's being used by the NUJ to deny his actual application. Because not allowing Craig Murray in court is a fucking travesty in and of itself. And just to point back to that first week that Steve had talked about, if you could pull up that Glass Box as an Instrument of Torture article. This is one of the articles that Craig wrote about Julian's trial. He also has a daily update and probably one of the best descriptions of the court cases that happened. But I just want to run through a little bit of this with you because I don't know if you knew or if our audience even remembers, because everything has gone crazy in the world since then. During the first part of Julian's trial, he was held in a glass box and only able to communicate by passing letters back and forth to his attorneys. And that in and of itself is a method of torture. But just to, let me see, yep, we got it up. Just to dig into this, and this is from March 2nd, 2020. So in Thursday's separate hearing on allowing Julian out of the armored box to sit with his legal team, I witnessed directly that Baraster's ruling against Assange was brought to her into court before she had defense counsel put the arguments and delivered by her entirely unchanged. I might start by explaining to you my position in the public gallery, vice versa the judge. All week I deliberately sat in front of I sat in the front right-hand seat. The gallery looks out through the armored glass window at the height of about 7 feet above the courtroom. It runs down one side of the courtroom. In the extreme right hand of the public gallery is the judge's bench, which sits below perpendicular to it. Remarkably, therefore, on the right-hand seat of the public gallery, you have an uninterrupted view of the top of the whole judge's bench and can see all the judge's paperwork and computer screen. Mark Summers, QC, outlined that in the case of Bolsov versus Russia, the European Court of Human Rights at Strasbourg ruled against the Russian state because Belsov had been tried in a glass cage, particularly identical in construction and in position in court to that which Assange was. It hindered his participation in the trial and his free access to counsel and deprived him of human dignity as a defendant. So I am interested, above and beyond this entire thing, how they are even getting away in a civilized Western nation of openly torturing a man in court at his own court trial.
What I find amazing is we allow serial killers to sit with their lawyers. The Boston bomber was allowed to sit with his lawyers. I mean, seriously, there's, I think BTK or whatever. This dude is like standing in court in this nice little suit, and he's talking about how he, slaughtered a bunch of women, and standing with his lawyers. But Julian Assange is acting as Hannibal Lecter. Or is that just me?
No, Steve kicked back on.
No, that was me. I was trying to go through my phone so that I didn't look like the protected witness, because we don't have a voice modulator. So I was,
What do you mean, Steve?
Yeah, but anyways, it's just nuts that this guy has to sit behind this glass wall and can't even speak to his lawyers. And the fact that people are just okay with that being a normal court process, and that's somehow fair, and it's crazy. And I don't know how to, I know I say this all the time, I don't know how to get people to see how bad this is. It's just really frustrating.
I'll co-sign that one.
I was going to say a big part of it is no portion of the media has their hair on fire. No portion of independent media, aside from us, there's no one that's covering, well, there's some others, but there's no one in video form as deliberately covering every update of this case as we have been. And I think that's one of the big problems, is you have these people with multi-million view platforms that decide to take a back seat when it comes to covering literally the thing that's going to allow them to continue to have that platform into the future if they so choose to do actual journalism.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time too. It has an effect on the way that an audience thinks too. If you're like training your audience to only perk their ears up when you talk about, Bernie or the election or Trump, and you don't mention Julian Assange, you don't mention the national security state, you don't mention press freedom, you don't mention Chelsea Manning or David McBride, or you're not telling people like I hardly ever see Kevin Gostola on other people's shows, and it's such a shame because he's got an entire podcast dedicated to whistleblowers. Like, if it's not in the consciousness of the audience, then they're not gonna fucking care when somebody else comes along like, why aren't you paying attention to this? And they're like, did you say what Elizabeth Warren said? Who gives a fuck? Like, there are massively more important things that you can concern yourself with and spend your time on. And if you're going to engage in politics, engage from the perspective that, like, this is not a system that's designed to do anything but kill most of us. And our solution to this machine that kills us shouldn't be, let's slap a couple shiny new parts on it every 2 to 4 years. It should be the design of a new machine.
Yeah, and I think, like, ever since Trump won the election in 2016, there's been this kind of like outcry in liberal politics about, oh, Trump said that the press is the enemy of the people. But like, the press will turn around and say that Assange is the enemy of the people. Even
mainstream media is the enemy of the people. I'll say it. Come at me, bro. I'll say it. They are absolutely the enemy of the people.
But like, Right, but like the idea here is that like in sort of like liberal political circles, one of the things that you keep seeing is that like they're outraged that Trump would, attack the media in our free democracy, right? And then when you go, okay, but the very thing that's going to save whatever you think is the free media in the free democracy is like making sure that Assange goes free. They don't care, and it's partly because they're holding a grudge from 2016 because they either blame Julian Assange in part for Hillary Clinton's loss, or they see Assange as part of this, ongoing Russiagate, Trump, Putin, WikiLeaks triangle, and they kind of think like, oh well, he deserves what he gets or something like this. And there's no way of thinking systemically about it, right? Like in terms of what it means for a system of communication, in terms of the way that the press works, because that if Assange is extradited and convicted under the Espionage Act, there goes whatever, the minimal amount of independence there used to be for outlets like New York Times and so on. That's gone. And so
well, I think that's part of the point, where the only real like groundbreaking with huge quotation marks around it report about exposing bullshit that's happening overseas in war is the Afghan papers that the Wall Street Journal put out, or Washington Post, one of those companies. And it was literally like the most softball, like kid glove shit you could say about the war in Afghanistan.
And it was like Chelsea Manning showed us that 8 years ago.
Right. And it's to the point that that's considered journalism, like saying the most basic, like, we have no idea what we're doing, somehow translated into them having this great piece, when all it was Amazon lashing out that Jeff Bezos lashing out that his company didn't get the contract to have all of the CIA servers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's so cartoonish, man, because when the Afghan papers came out, what came out immediately after in their own reporting, in their own articles about it, was the process by which they went through to obtain this information. And they threw $3.5 million, or no, it was 3.5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars Freedom of Information Act requests, lawsuits, and they litigated for every scrap of information that they put into the Afghan papers. And I don't know a single content creator or journalist who's working for an independent outlet or a smaller outlet or self-publishing that has, $250,000 lying around. Yeah, where they can engage in these FOIA suits and try and obtain information that way. And the FOIA process is being abused so egregiously by not just by our government, but by governments in the Western world, that it's being made to where if Julian is allowed to go through this rendition and appear before the Eastern District of Virginia, the only time any sort of like quote unquote state secrets or leaks will become available to the public at large is through a well-funded effort in order to make one side of the duopoly or the other look bad. And it'll be either in Bezos's case, a lashing out because you didn't get your contract, or it'll be a way to rat fuck a political opponent. And that's it. That's the only bombshell news we're ever going to fucking get. I'm not going to live in that world. I'm going to fight my ass off for a world where there's privacy for the weak and transparency for the powerful.
So yeah, if we could we get into the what is this? The affidavit from Bill Binney?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will put it up on the share screen, and then for the first time today, it will be bright on my screen.
I've got the images up.
Do you have the slides?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, never mind then.
I tried to clip out as much as I could of like the meat of the information. The first slide that we have, though, is about Bill Binney in and of himself. This is him going over essentially what he calls his credentials. There's a lot of people that trust Bill Binney, but I do have to put out there, just as we do every time that we talk about someone from the intelligence community, that there is a possibility that there may still be issues and they may still have some kind of ulterior motive, and they are still under legal obligation not to tell us everything that they know. But with this, as you can see, I don't want to just read through all of it, but I just wanted to put that up there just to kind of put this history out there and give a little background on Bill. He was one of the technical directors at the NSA, one of the head people in charge of actually writing and overseeing the development of particular programs. And he was working on the programs while the NSA was developing their mass surveillance technology. And he had developed a tool that was previously used called ThinThread, or that would have been used, called ThinThread. And essentially, and the next slide that we have breaks it down for the way that it is used to collect information from the NSA. So do you want to read through that article or that second slide, Steve?
Sure. Devices running ThinThread monitored international communications traffic passing over the internet. Where one side of an international communication was domestic, the NSA had to comply with the requirements of the Fourth Amendment and the Foreign Intelligence Services Surveillance Act, FISA. With ThinThread, for United States nationals, no content would be captured and metadata would be encrypted to ensure the privacy of U.S. citizens until a warrant could be obtained from the FISA court. The attacks on September 11th completely changed how the NSA conducted surveillance. Funny how that worked out there, Bill. FISA ceased to be an operative concern, and the individual liberties preserved in the U.S. Constitution were no longer a consideration. In October 2001, the NSA began to implement a group of intelligence activities now known as the President's Surveillance Program. So what Bill's saying here is that ThinThread didn't violate your Fourth Amendment, kept your metadata encrypted, and maintained your digital privacy. At least that's the way it's, been put to us. But we'll honestly never fucking know, because they didn't go with ThinThread. They went with a program called Stellar Wind, which captured absolutely everything and led to the construction of not just server warehouses, but like server villages, in order to just store all of our data. And it's all warrantless, and it's all 100%, I don't even know if it's illegal anymore, but it's a fucking gigantic gross violation of our civil liberties, basic fucking fundamental right to privacy.
And the reason that this came out is because Bill Binney is going around and doing Ask Me Anythings, and it's in regards to Russiagate, but he also gets asked a lot of questions about the Edward Snowden disclosures and what was put forward to the world, and then what our Congress then made legal. And that's what this third slide, I believe, begins to talk about there. Exhibit 4, labeled Barney Access, shows the tap points the NSA's Barley program. Barnley, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Blarney
is a program responsible for the upstream collection of data from 30 plus providers of internet service, domestic long distance service, and data centers. Once the data is collected, the NSA breaks it down into various subcategories, which are made searchable through various query programs. These categories are shown in Exhibit 5. We don't have the exhibits attached to this, but the broadest query program is called XKeyscore. According to Exhibit 5, X-Keyscore is a method for searching the front-end full-take feeds from the fiber optic cables. Full take means the NSA is taking everything off of those lines, which means full content of emails and web queries. This includes, and this is just referring back to the affidavit that it was written for, but the plaintiff's emails and web queries. X-Keyscore can be searched or tasked by means of an email address. Thus, when Mr. Snowden said that he could read the emails of a federal judge if he had the judge's email address, he was not exaggerating. And that just gives so much power to such a small group of people. Like the documentary Millie Weaver put out that shows how this information not only is collected by the NSA and all these intelligence agencies, but then transferred and held by private corporations that then sell it to other private corporations. And the ones that own it and are doing the selling are owned by the same people responsible for these organizations.
We got nothing there. Chime in, anyone, if you got anything to say about this shit. I think it's both creepy and fascinating, and it really, like, I know Misty's into true crime stuff. Like, this is true crime stuff right here. That's basically what our surveillance industry has become, is just this massive criminal enterprise that partners with the same people that fucking sell you shit. And there's now,
Steve, this is way worse than any true crime story I've ever heard in my life. Are you kidding me? All of the serial killers in the world in history combined do not have the body count of one US president. You know what I'm saying? These people are sociopathic. No, I think they're probably psychopathic. They have no, y'all, Obama ran out of bombs. He won a Nobel Peace Prize and then ran out of bombs. These are the people we have in charge of things. You know, that's not good. And then they now have access to literally the entirety of your life. I mean, our lives are online. It's very digital. We're all, our credit card purchases, our our banking and our social media and all of that stuff. And then we're giving these, I mean, they're crazy people. And I'm not saying that to be like ableist or, offensive or what. These are completely insane, evil people, and they're in charge. And then we give them access to all of our information. That doesn't seem like a great idea to me. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. At the same time that they want to prevent us from knowing anything about what they do behind closed doors. Exactly. And it's that information disparity that supports, maintains the power disparity, that's going on there.
It's asymmetrical psychological warfare engaged on the civilian population by a hostile rogue element inside government that then turns and hijacks the rest of the entire democratic process, and we should be mad about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I've been using in sort of like my more recent analyses is based on my research about counter insurgency methods. And the basic idea here is that like counterinsurgency has three main principles. The first principle is total information awareness, which means total surveillance. You have to know everything that's going on, which means you have to be able to see and collect and analyze and store all the information you possibly can. The second thing is isolate and eliminate the antagonistic trouble population, right? The antagonistic minority. So whether this is the Vietnam fighters fighting the U.S. military, or whether this is counterinsurgency in Iraq, or whether this is the U.S. government using counterinsurgency methods to break up the Black Panthers and other organizations in the United States. The idea is that total information awareness becomes the basis by which you can isolate and eliminate the so-called problem subset of the population. But then the corresponding strategy to that is then win the hearts and minds, so to speak, of the rest of the general population. And so what this means is the three parts here are total surveillance, violence against the subset that's seen as the problem, and then psychological operations to quote unquote win the hearts and minds of the rest of the population. And so the counterinsurgency model actually captures surveillance, psychological operations, the violence of military and police apparatus, and combines them into one overarching theory. And you know, as I was studying this counterinsurgency stuff, and then I was thinking about Julian Assange calling WikiLeaks an intelligence agency of the people, what I realized is, in fact, when people study surveillance and think about the NSA or Google or whatever on the one hand, and then other people study news media and, you know, sometimes through like a psychological operations kind of lens, journalism, you know, that sort of thing, they're studying these things as separate, but they're not. News media outlets are intelligence agencies, and the question is, for whom are they doing intelligence? And that means that institutions like the NSA and institutions like the New York Times, they're all just on a spectrum, right? It's not that they're different kinds of things, like by their essence, right, in and of themselves. It's more like that they're just different degrees on the same spectrum of the same kinds of institutions, intelligence institutions, and they do different functions within this larger counterinsurgency operation. And that means that if WikiLeaks is an intelligence agency of the people, then we have to ask, like, the corporate-owned media outlets in the US, for whom are they doing intelligence, right? And obviously, you know, there's enough historical evidence to show that it's not clear that it's always for the public and in the public good. But I think that gives us a theoretical model for bringing all those things together and thinking about it through that counterinsurgency lens. You know, it also explains, you know, why the U.S. government tries to eliminate these, you know, why they use surveillance as the basis to eliminate these things that they see as threats to it.
As you broke that down, the intelligence, the isolate and eliminate, and then the propagandize is the word I wrote down as you were explaining that third step. That's exactly what's been done to WikiLeaks and to Julian, most in particularly. And if you try to view the world as there are those trying to release information and those trying to guard it, the entire last year of the world, so to speak, to me at least, seems like it's been to further isolate and to further gather intelligence while making the propaganda so that way the main core issue is ignored. And I know it's easy to feel that way about a myriad of topics for whatever you're fighting for, but in particular, the global media military establishment has been working against WikiLeaks and literally reshaping itself to be able to come to this point now where 10 years ago, Julian wouldn't have been able to be prosecuted in this way. But I wanted to, we have 2 slides left for the Bill Binney article, but we are or affidavit, but we are already getting kind of late here. And I think Steve's screen's almost completely black from the light at this point.
It is almost completely black. Yeah, which is weird because it's not completely dark out here. But like if I turn on the flashlight on my phone and hold it right up to my face, it doesn't show up. Like it's fucking weird.
Wow.
Super weird. I don't know.
I'll mess with it tomorrow.
Do you want to dig into these last 2 slides and then we can wrap up for the evening, Steve?
Sure. Let's do that. Bulk collection is making it difficult for the NSA to find the real threats. The net effect from the current approach is that people die first. The NSA has missed repeated terrorist incidents over the last few years despite its mass monitoring efforts. The NSA cannot identify future terrorism because 99.99999% of what it collects and analyzes is foreseeably irrelevant. This is swamping the intelligence community while creating the moral hazards and risks to the Republic identified by plaintiff Schuchart. After a terrorist incident occurs, only then do analysts and law enforcement go into their vast data and focus on the perpetrators of the crime. This is exactly the reverse of what they should be doing. If the NSA wants to predict intentions and capabilities prior to the crime, then it must focus on known subversive relationships, giving decision makers time to react and influence events. That's a little creepy, I'm not gonna lie. Got a lot of love for Bill Benny, but that's creepy. Finally, smart selection is not enough. Governments, courts, and the public need to have an absolute means of verifying what intelligence agencies are doing. This should be done within government by having a cleared technical team responsible to the whole of government, and the courts with the authority and clearances to go into any intelligence agency and look directly into the databases and tools in use. This would ensure that government as a whole could get to the bottom line of truth, the bottom line truth of what the intelligence agencies were really doing. I would also suggest that agencies be required to implement software that audits their analytic processes to ensure compliance with law and to automatically detect and report any violations to the courts and others. Finally, that's like body cams for computers in real time, kind of with accountability. That's an interesting concept. Finally, it is impossible to understate the importance of the court's decision in this case. The intelligence communities in most of the world are using the American system of bulk collection with all its inefficiencies and moral hazards. If the United States were to get out of this business and implement a system of smart selection, it would establish a healthy precedent that would have ramifications all over the planet.
So I want to, before we get into more of it, or the rest of it, or talk about the rest of it, I guess, I just want to point back to number 59. After a terrorist incident occurs, and it ends with, if the NSA wants to predict intentions and capabilities prior to crime, then it must focus on known subversive relationships, giving decision makers time to react and influence events. The National Counterintelligence Strategy for 2020 through 2022 puts activists or hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure organizations on the same level as Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and ISIS. So another part of this problem that isn't addressed in this for one reason or another, mostly I assume because of context, is having a government with the authority to just randomly declare terrorist organizations. Like, for example, the Insane Clown Posse, a decade ago almost, was declared a domestic terrorist organization. And it was one of the first exercises of mass censorship that most people don't even realize happened, where almost all of the major platforms across the internet, Alex Jones Insane Clown Posse before they did it to Alex Jones, simply at the behest of the government. Not that I like Insane Clown Posse, but the authority to declare a terrorist organization is almost more important than the surveillance in and of itself.
Andrew's a low-key juggalo.
That's what
Hey, juggalo makeup, facial recognition hates that shit. So more power to you, brother. Yeah, it does. I read an article about it.
Nothing from my old MySpace profile.
Right after the articles came out that juggalo makeup beat facial recognition, Facebook came up with this, here, let us map your face and we'll turn you into an evil clown little app.
Amazing.
Guarantee you that the juggalos had to, like, not being able to map juggalos' faces in makeup had something to do with that.
Let me pipe in for a second. People don't use those fucking apps. You're training their goddamn models. You're training their AI models when you do that. Don't do that. Just don't fucking use them, please. For the love of God.
And don't let your kids use them either.
Absolutely.
Right? The fuck you think Snapchat is? Snapchat has never turned a profit the entire time they've operated. Fucking facial recognition and snitch software. That's all that shit is.
Yeah.
But so I would like to thank everybody for joining us.
Turn off that
tonight.
damn TikTok. I'm sorry, I had to get that out.
And I would like to thank Patrick for joining us. If you could, Patrick, please let people know your final thoughts, where they can find you, and what else you have coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, for sure. Just once again, thanks again for inviting me on, and it's been really fun to talk to you all, and had a good time. The website, the bibliography website, is WikiLeaksBibliography.org, and it's up now. It's there. My email is on the website, so if anybody had any questions or any suggestions, or you find any errors, or just anything about it, you can find my email on there and get a hold of me. You can also check my faculty page at Grand Valley State University, and my email is on there as well. And then yeah, just in terms of projects, right now I'm going to work on getting this proposal for a book on cypherpunk ethics together over the next few weeks. And I've got a few academic articles that are about to be rolled out that deal with Assange, WikiLeaks, the cypherpunks, and so on. Of course, the academic publishing cycle is like really long, so those won't be out for a while. But if anybody's interested in just Word document or PDF drafts of what I have, I'm allowed to distribute those for free. So again, at my email is where you can get a hold of me.
Yeah, I would love to get those and go over them on the show. I think that would be wonderful. But my name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. I appreciate you joining us tonight, Patrick. I appreciate my co-hosts, as well as Steve, Kimber, and everyone else behind the scenes making this happen, as well as the DC protests. I just want to one last time drop the links to our calls to action in chat. But also I want to make sure that everyone has signed the petition for the Reporters Without Borders. So I'm going to put that in there first. We will be joined this Saturday with the Rebecca Vincent, who is the international director, I believe, for Reporters Without Borders, to discuss Julian's situation. So I am beyond excited about having her on with us. And yeah, if you like what you see, you can find us online at action4assange.com. You can find all of this on Twitter at action_4Assange. Yeah, thank you guys for watching.
Okay, I'm Misty, and I'm super sad because I don't know why Andrew's camera isn't working, but I didn't get to see Jazz Hands this week.
I'm sorry, I did them too, just for you, Misty.
I'm seriously, I just sat here kind of pouting while you were talking because your camera's not working. And I'm like, damn it, I'm not going to get to see it. Okay, so anyways, yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. I have a show with my friend Jesse called Facts on the Ground that you can find on YouTube. Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for hanging out with us. This was a fun show. This was a good one, guys. But yeah, definitely, I'm excited about your website. I think it's necessary work, so thank you for doing that. Thank you, Andrew and Steve, for having me on as usual, and Kimber and Josh and everybody, everybody that donated to the GoFundMe, that's helping everybody get to DC, and all. Thank you guys. You guys, it's really cool to see a group of people come around a cause that's as important as this one. So I mean, if you guys know me, I'm a cynic. So that does my cold, cynical heart gets a little bit. It revives it just a tiny bit. So yeah. But yeah, thanks for having me on. See you next time.
My name's Steve Voikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. If you're watching it on YouTube, you can find it by typing in Slow News Day podcast into your browser. I'm also on the Rockfin and D Live. Thanks, Patrick. I enjoyed having you on my show. This has been a really good talk. Congratulations on the site build, and I wish you a lot of success with that. I'm stunned that something like WikiLeaks bibliography didn't already exist, but I'm glad that you got to be the guy to do it. Thank you to my co-hosts, Jazz Handrew and Misty, and to Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s, and Mean Panda for the graphics, and everyone in the chat and in the Discord. I fucking love you guys. The people that donated, we're going to make you a special thank you video. By special, I don't mean that we'll be without clothing. I just mean it'll be fun. Yeah. The next time we see you will be in the nation's capital. So until then, good luck to us all.